Hello, and welcome to a new episode on classical music composition. This time we'll learn how to create a rondo from the very basics and also a few general tips and principles that might help you improve your already composed ones. The rondo, as musical form, is strongly related to the concept of circular motion, and it was favored by many 18th century composers as a top choice for their slow and final movements, but also as an autonomous genre in itself. In formal terms, there are two main types of rondo, each of which has its own subtypes. In this video we'll focus on the plain rondo type, which was normally found as final or slow movement in symphonic works or small-sized piano sonatas. The rondo sonata type, on the other hand, was a more sophisticated version of the rondo, usually reserved for the final movement of piano sonatas, chamber music and concertos. For simplicity's sake, we'll leave the rondo sonata out for now, but I might bring that topic back some other time if you want. Formal and tonal plan. A rondo is a structure built primarily by the juxtaposition of discrete sections, each of which is normally marked by memorable tuneful ideas. Its defining feature is the recurrence of a tonic key theme or refrain, usually labeled as A, which alternates with the different episodes or couplets. While the refrain always presents the same musical idea, even if it's in a shortened or varied form, each episode usually displays its own and distinctive musical material. The total number of episodes in a rondo form is variable, but a minimum of 2 episodes is required in order to be considered as such. With regard to tonal plan, each episode is usually composed in a different key, which is also different from the refrains. When the initial key is in major mode, it's customary that the episode 1 sounds in the key of the dominant, the 5th degree of the initial key. There are no fixed rules regarding the key choice for the rest of episodes, but some are more common than others. For instance, the episode 2 usually displays a major-minor contrast with respect to the initial key, making the 6th degree of the initial key the most obvious choice. However, the minor mode of the initial key is also a valid option, even if it's not so common. For the episode 3, in case there is one, the 4th degree of the initial key is by far the most common choice, but is by no means mandatory. Sometimes we can find the flat 3rd degree key in this section or even the initial key, which is kind of exceptional but possible. This last option is, however, common in a specific variant of the rondo, in which the 3rd episode is the literal or varied restatement of the episode's 1 material, but now in the initial key. With regard to minor mode initial keys, in this case the customary option for the episode 1 is the 3rd degree of the initial key, while the 5th and 6th degrees, or even the major mode of the initial key, are common options for episodes 2 and 3. Then again, these aren't absolute rules but general principles, and there is always room for some experimentation with regard to key choices. It's also worth noting that episodes can sometimes modulate through more than one key, expanding even more the total key areas in the general tonal plan. Apart from the main sections already discussed, in a rondo we can find a series of brief optional passages that serve as link between sections. When said links connect the refrain with the following episode, they're known as transition or bridge, and they normally function as modulating passages. On the other hand, when a link connects the ending of an episode with the refrain, we speak of a retransition, which prepares the return of the initial key. The number and size of these passages is up to the composer, and it's strongly influenced by the overall length and complexity of the rondo. As a general principle, the more complex and longer a rondo is, the more likely is to find these types of passages in it. But even in those cases their presence is not mandatory, and the composer might choose to skip some in order to look for a more explicit contrast between sections. Rondos that don't present any kind of link between sections or very few are sometimes referred to by the French spelling rondo, and are considered the most basic subtype within the rondo family. Finally, all kind of rondos usually display a last optional episode in the initial key to bring the piece to a more satisfactory ending. This last passage, which is variable in length, is commonly known as coda. Composing a rondo. Before going into details, it's always a good idea to plan, beforehand, the general layout of our piece, even if that doesn't mean that we can't modify it later as we see fit. In this case I'm going for a 2 episodes type rondo, which is also known as the short rondo form. D major will be my initial key, and for episodes 1 and 2, I'll go for A and F major, which are respectively the fifth and flat third degrees of the initial key. With this in mind, we can now proceed to our next step, which is composing the initial theme or refrain. Unlike minuets, rondos can be composed in many different styles and time signatures, so there are plenty of stylistic questions to ask ourselves before even starting to work. For this rondo, I chose the 6/8 time signature, with the intention in mind of evoking the playful counterdance character displayed in many 18th century rondos, especially those used as final movements. The standard formal choice for the initial theme of a rondo is the structure known as period. A basic period is an 8 bars theme in which there is a weak cadence at bar 4, usually a half cadence or an imperfect authentic cadence, and a strong perfect authentic cadence at bar 8. If you aren't familiar with these concepts, I strongly suggest you watch my series on classical music cadences before proceeding forward. In the first half of a period, we've got an initial basic idea, which can last up to 2 bars, and that it usually functions as tonic prolongation in terms of harmony. This basic idea is then followed by a contrasting idea that leads to a weak cadence at bar 4. The second half of the period begins as a restatement of the basic idea, literal or varied, followed by a new contrasting idea that leads to a strong cadence at bar 8. And now from the beginning. For the first episode's theme, I looked for a strong expressive contrast, going for a fanfare-like sonority far away from the refrain's lighter tone. This theme is also a period, though a less common variant in which both halves end with a perfect authentic cadence, yet the second one feels slightly more conclusive. As you may notice, we've got 16 bars instead of 8, and that's because in this section the hypermeter, which is the grouping of measures beyond the notated meter, follows a 2-bar pattern. In other words, these feel like 8 bars in an implicit 12/8 time signature. The second episode's theme is another period, close to the refrain with regard to its joyful character, yet contrasting in tonal means. So this is what we've got so far. This is not bad for a start, but as you may have noticed, the plain juxtaposition of contrasting sections and the excessive regularity of the repetitions make it sound dull after a while. Let's see what we can do to transform this into an actual rondo. Formal variety. So far, all our formal units are structured as simple themes, in this case periods. However, in an actual rondo we usually find a mixture of more complex structures, such as the small binary and the rounded binary form. Since our first episode feels long enough already, I'll focus on expanding our refrain and second episode through different procedures. Starting from our refrain, I'll expand the initial period structure into a rounded binary form. In order to do so, I'll write a 4 bars long contrasting middle section, followed by a full restatement of the initial period. In addition to this, I'll also write a brief caudetta, a small conclusive passage, based on tonic prolongation harmony, that'll sound after the refrain to bring the music to a more conclusive ending. Let's hear the whole refrain now. It's important to keep in mind that there is no need for a full restatement of the refrain each time the section reappears throughout the rondo. Shortened or varied restatements of the refrain are useful options in order to add variety and reduce the risk of boring the listener with too many exact repetitions. For instance, on the second reappearance of the refrain, I'll go for a shortened version, saving the full restatement for the end of the rondo. With regard to the second episode, I went for a simple binary form with 2 juxtaposed themes. The new material was taken from a popular 18th century French tune called Marlborough is Going Off to War, and split into 2 contrasting variations. Borrowing and quoting pre-existent music was common practice among classical composers, and we should not be afraid of doing so too, as long as we are honest about it. Just like with the refrain, I added a closing passage to bring this section to a satisfactory ending. Links and coda. I composed 2 transitions and 2 retransitions for this rondo, in order to properly connect every section. Transitions are loose formal units, which means they don't need to follow a standard structure. Their main function is destabilizing the initial key, and also building expectation towards the following section. A common optional strategy is linking the beginning of a transition to the previous section's ending passage or caudetta, which is what I did in this example. Notice how this transition modulates to the next section's key, and ends on a dominant chord just before proceeding forward. In the second transition, I used a free variant of the Monty schema, a chromatically ascending pattern, which is very useful in modulations. Also notice how the transition ends on a C minor triad, instead of C major, which would be the logical choice as the dominant of F major, the next section's key. Ending on C minor, however, hints towards a different tonal goal, and makes the beginning of the following section in F major a pleasant surprise. Retransitions follow a similar idea than transitions, but this time the expectation is built towards the return of the refrain and the initial key. They usually end with a dominant prolongation and lead in passages that literally feel like the music is falling down towards the re-beginning of the refrain. Finally, we just need to put a proper end to this rondo with a customary coda. In this case, the coda acts as a virtuosistic extension of the brief refrain's caudetta, leading to a much more satisfying ending. Let's have a look to our finished work. That's all for now. Let me know if this video was helpful, and see you next time.